Margaret, welcome back to my channel. Today we're here to review Margaret Atwood's The Testaments, which is the sequel to her novel The Handmaid's Tale. This novel, they're both set in Gilead, which is a fictional society which seeks to reflect some of the problems with the patriarchy, but also make some kind of a commentary on recent legislation in the United States which would seek to restrict the reproductive rights of women. So within Gilead, we have women being persecuted and stripped of their freedoms. Some of those freedoms would have included the right to choose one's profession, the right to choose one's mate, and to decide whether or not a person wanted to have children. So Gilead as a society is set up by turning women against each other, and the patriarchy, the men seem to be in charge, but they've also established women in hierarchical roles that would pit them against each other in a sort of kill or be killed relationship. Kill or be killed literally or figuratively. While the male commanders seem to be the ones in charge, like I said, they've established women in hierarchical roles, and so we have women functioning at various levels of the society. The highest ranking women are the aunts who run the systems. They're the ones who run the schools, who function as liaisons between the commanders and the other women, and they're responsible for training those who come below them. Below the aunts, we seem to have wives who are the wives of these commanders, wives who've been chosen for these commanders in some form of an arranged marriage, and because of their husband's rank, they enjoy some privileges within the society, but they're also subject to the whims and fancies of their husbands. We have the women who work in their households, from the Marthas to the handmaids. And handmaids, of course, are the women who have been persecuted because they've been promiscuous, but they've also demonstrated that they have the capacity to bear children, and so they're sent to these wives. When the wives are not able to bear their own children, they're sent to live in households and function as surrogates to produce children, and those children become the rights of the wives. But we know all of that from The Handmaid's Tale. The revelation in the Testaments is that we have people who have escaped Gilead and sought refuge in neighboring Canada. And those refugees have been functioning in some kind of an underground resistance and trying to funnel people out of Gilead. And so there is some connection between Canada and Gilead. There is some kind of underground railroad system where people are able to move back and forth. And while it seems like the natural progression should be out of Gilead, we also have Gilead sending representatives. These are called Pearl Girls, who go into Canada trying to recruit young women to join the Gilead Society. And the resistance, the refugees who are forming the resistance, they seem to have interloped this Pearl Girl system, and they are getting messages back and forth between the borders. But that's the backdrop of the story. The plot really follows three women who are part of the Gilead Society in three different levels, and we get narrative from all three perspectives as their lives intersect. One is Aunt Lydia, who is a high-ranking aunt in the system in Gilead. And while she publicly performs her duties, she's secretly rebelling and recording her activities and her thoughts in a journal. The other two perspectives are from two young girls, one who's grown up in Gilead and is being groomed for marriage to a commander, and the other girl has grown up outside of Gilead. She's been living in Canada and been studying the Gilead system from the outside. And eventually she makes her way to Gilead as well, and all three women have to decide how they're going to work together to either continue the system or fight against it. As a commentary on the present legislation in the United States, I feel like the subject matter in this book is very relevant, very significant, and will provoke some conversation, which I think is necessary to have at this point. I think the function of fiction is to allow us to reflect on what could happen in our society if things are not curtailed. And so I think that Margaret Atwood's book is very important in that regard, that it brings up a question for us to ask ourselves and figure out what we want the answers to be. when Margaret Atwood cast the United States of America as Gilead, as this patriarchal society that seeks to dominate women, that seeks to punish women for some of the choices that they've made in their lives. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to allow this system to get to the place where it is in Gilead or not? What are we going to do about it? Are we going to continue as women to allow men to set us up and pit us against each other, sometimes for their own benefit? Are we going to allow Gilead to happen? However, that's the allegorical function of the novel. As a strict read, this book is not as interesting as I would like it to be. For me, the story felt like it had that potential for interest, but there was nothing about the writing itself that sparkled. I didn't feel an emotional connection to these characters. I felt like they fell flat a little bit. I didn't get the dimension to them that I wanted in order to really feel moved by what was happening to them. In fact, for most of this book, it felt as though the different plot points were just draft markers that intimated what was going to happen without actually giving me the tools I needed to generate some kind of an emotional interest or emotional connection. The characters felt like they were introduced and disposed of conveniently, and some of their choices, some of the decisions that they made didn't feel like I got enough backstory to really feel like the characters are moving on their own and not just as puppets on a marionette string. At all points, I could feel like the author was manipulating these characters and just introducing them and killing them off whenever she didn't need them anymore. And I didn't like that. So this is a book that I appreciate and respect for its symbolic quality because of what it does to bring awareness to the possibility of what a society could look like if we don't work to prevent Gilead from happening. I applaud Atwood for starting this conversation about the potential of the real life Gilead and the public and social commentary that she provides with this book. But as a fictional representation, I didn't feel like this was a very successful novel. I didn't think it was very interesting. I didn't think that a lot of what I look for in a novel was really accomplished in this book. So my personal rating is not as high as I'd like it to be. This novel has been nominated for the Booker Prize, which is going to be awarded later today. So I guess we'll have to watch and see whether or not the judges decide that this book should be praised for its symbolic quality, or whether we should look at this book for what it does as just a work of fiction. So I'll be watching the Booker Awards later to see how it fares. I hope you will too. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read this book and what you thought about it. I'd love to hear from you. And if you've read other books by Margaret Atwood, not just The Handmaid's Tale and The Testaments, how does this compare to her other novels? Aside from The Handmaid's Tale, the only other work that I have read from this author is her adaptation of The Tempest, which was called Hagseed. And I admire Atwood's writing in general, so I'm not sure what happened here. I'd love to talk with you about it in the comments. So let's talk down there. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time, happy reading. Bye.